Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar today, which is What's New in Revit 2025. Today's presenters, we've got Lawrence Hooker, who's our Principal Consultant for Structures. We've got Paul Grimston, who's our Principal Consultant for Architecture, and myself, Simon Locke, Principal Consultant for MEP. In today's agenda, we're going to split it into the four areas. We're going to look at the core features first, which are hopefully beneficial for everybody, every user of Revit. Then we're going to take a look at some of the MEP key features this year. And then we'll follow that up with architecture, and that'll be Paul leading that bit. Then we'll finish off with structures with Lawrence. I'll be taking us through the first bit, so we're looking at MEP, but also what I'd like to do first, for those of you not too familiar with Symmetry, we'll just go through a brief introduction of who we are and what we do. Symmetry was formed quite a while ago, around about 1989. And it's grown exponentially over the years, mainly through acquisition. So we're currently at around about 1,000 employees in about 7 countries and 33 offices. Over the years, again, the size has come from about 23 acquisitions. Our key sort of catchphrase and the thing that we work towards is we challenge people to work smarter for a better future. So we do that in the following ways. The 4 sort of pillars or cornerstones that we try to follow is we work with and help people with leading edge technology, so cutting edge technology, so both Autodesk and other vendors as well. We help our customers through our knowledge and expertise, so consultancy, training, etc. And we become a trusted partner through the advice that we give, again, looking at the software, looking at the training, the hardware, etc. Which all ends up with people working smarter, us as well. So the kind of work we do, obviously we work with different people. So we work with manufacturers on the MFG side, contractors, designs, consultants, and end clients, owner operators, etc. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we work on sort of the training, support, consulting, but we also provide IT solutions, so hardware, software, antivirus, design software, etc. And we also have people embedded in on long-term project delivery, both sort of BIM consultancy, design work, drafting, etc. And currently we're the #1 Autodesk solution provider globally. Some of the software we deal with, some of it is internal Symmetry technology, and some of it is external partners. So obviously Autodesk is probably the main one that everybody knows. But then there's all of these that you can see on the screen here. So I'm not going to read them all out, but we do have our own internal solutions as well as the external partners we work with on sort of a daily basis. Just a brief introduction to Symmetry's own technology. We've got 3 main technology groups: Navigate for AEC, so for Revit, cloud, etc. Then we've got Sevilla for manufacturing, and then CQ for license optimization, deployment management of software. So that's a little bit about the Symmetry as a company, what we do and who we are. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into some of the actual the topics of today. So we're going to start off with the core features of Revit. And the first one we're going to look at is the project browser. Now, as you know, the search function has been around for a little while in the project browser. It's been enhanced this year with this addition here. So when you do search for a keyword in the project browser, rather than it just giving you the results of that keyword, what it does, it's maintaining the structure of the project browser now. So you can see all of the child nodes are still visible and all of the actual structure, but it's actually just highlighting the actual the keyword that you're looking for. So it lets you kind of keep an eye on where it actually is within the project browser too. So that's the change on that for this year. And we'll see that later on. We'll look at the live software very shortly. The next one is quite a main one, and this is sheet collections. This will allow you to basically create multiple groups or packages of sheets within the project browser. One thing to be careful on with this, it will allow you to create duplicate sheet numbers within these different sheet collections. Obviously, that might be useful for certain regions, but not necessarily for everybody. So just to be a bit aware of that one. And also with the addition of the select sheet collection, there's an additional parameter that can be used within your sheet list, which is what I can call sheet collection. And it also allows you to drag and drop your sheets into these collections, what they've been made, once they've been made. So I'll show you that one very shortly. Moving on to the next one, and this is multiple alignment for your annotation. So this will allow you to align and sort of standardize the location of your tags, text, etc. with one or two clicks, basically. So you'll get additional options within the ribbon, which you can see here on the presentation. And again, Paul will be showing this later in his live demo. The next one's quite a good one, which is, it's not such a visual one, unfortunately, but it's background export to PDF. So once you send your PDFs out for export, you can now get an option at the bottom of the dialog box, which allows you to export in background, which is then going to allow you to continue working on your project while this is happening, while it's all processing in the background. So it should be a good time saver, that one. Again, another one not too sort of visual or great to sort of demo, but there are some discipline updates this year. So there's some additional disciplines. So here you can see over the right-hand side, medical equipment, things like food service equipment, etc., audio-visual devices. And you can see the disciplines that they've been added into here. So the new categories within visibility graphics. And these are the disciplines that have been added to here. The other thing they've done is they've updated the interface slightly with regards to the options bar. So some options, some items that you would normally find in the options bar when you go into sort of context sensitive functions are now being moved either into the ribbon or onto the properties palette, depending. And again, you can see there's a list here on the presentation as well. The next one, again, is another quite handy, especially for the management side. And this will allow you to create export mapping for IFC. So you can basically save IFC mapping templates out of the project, and you can actually save them within and import them into new projects as well. So it allows you to kind of standardize your IFC mapping. You can give it to other sort of project people and share it amongst the team. So it's a handy feature. The next one to look at is the import and export ability of step files. So this will allow you to bring in things like 3D manufacturing data from likes of Fusion 360 without having to convert it to DWG, etc. So it allows you to import and export the step file from Revit, so you can coordinate and collaborate better with our partners within the manufacturing space. For those people who create families, this one should be a good one for you as well. So what you're able to do now within the family editor is you can create 0 and single element arrays within the family. So the example here, you can see we've got a lighting fixture, but what you've got the ability to do is to show it with 0 amounts on it, or possibly 1, etc., which wasn't possible in the past. So that's some of the highlights of the core features so far. I'm going to move just briefly into the MEP area, which is the area I sort of cover. And the one thing that they've done this year is they've disabled the mark value for MEP elements. So the list there shows things like air terminals, lighting fixtures, typically elements that you'll have a lot of within a project. Now, previously, when you placed them in, it would auto-increment the mark value. Now what it does, it just blanks it off. So it allows you to then look at your numbering down the line, because quite often you'll delete things, you'll add things in, you move things around, and then the numbering kind of goes sort of out of sync. So it allows you to then consider the numbering a bit later on down the line using something like either manual input, or if you've got an automated sort of numbering system like Navigate or something like that, you can then do the numbering then. The following one has added a couple of additional MEP parameters. So the first one is the maximum amount of circuits for data panels. Now this has already been available for power panels for quite a while, but now you're able to maximize the value for data panels and fire protection panels, etc. So for things like a data switch, you can set 10 outputs, etc. on there. So rather than just having an unlimited amount. The other one for the fabrication guys is they've added material gauge into there. So this will be set within the fabrication database. So it is a read-only parameter, but it will come through now into the properties palette, so you can kind of use it within the Revit project. And again, there might be some more additional ones coming throughout the year. And the next one is outside of Revit, kind of. So the enhancement here is within the fabrication data manager. And this is still in sort of tech preview. But what you can do now is you can actually search for key information. So rather than just filter for things like manufacturer and range and material, etc., you can now search for key information. So that's enough of the PowerPoints for now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flick into Revit itself, and we're just going to look at a few of these key areas that we talked about just there. So the one I mentioned earlier was the families. So this is the one for me, one of my favorite ones, and this is where you can actually have a 0 or a 1 value within an array. So you can see here within the project, I've got these sort of track lighting components. So one there, and one there. So this is the same family, but it's just shown in different ways. So it's a line-based family. If I look at this one here, we can see the value down on here is set to 3. This one here is set to 1, and this one here is set to 0. So again, it's just a case of adjusting that here. Now you can be a bit smarter with these families. You can have them linked to parameters and make the object wider, so it automatically arrays them a bit more. So again, you could do all of that sort of stuff. So the main difference is that you can do a 0 and 1. So actually looking at the family, you pretty much put the family together as you would. You create the array, you associate it with the parameter as you would normally, and then again you can see there you've got the array set to 0. Now again, when it's loaded into the project, this is the sort of end result that you get. So hopefully, again, if you do create families and you do use the arrays within families, then you could get some good use out of that. The next one, I'm just going to switch into a different data set, is we can take a look down here, and we'll take a look down at the sheets there. And you can see there I've got one sheet collection in there called collection 1. Again, you can delete, you can add these in as and when you want. Again, on the right click there, we've got the option there for new sheet collection. So I just create that one there, and then I can just rename it. And I'm going to call this one Mechanical, and then I'll just create another one, and then we'll just have that one renamed to Electrical. And there we go. Again, very similar to create new sheets anyway. You just right click on the sheet collection, go to new sheet, choose your title block as per usual, and then it adds the sheet in there. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you've got to be careful with this because it will allow you to have duplicate sheet numbers now. So this is where you do have to sort of manage this a little bit carefully. So again, in here, new sheet, and there we go. Again, you have the same sheet number there. So again, you'll just have to be careful with that. If you do want your different sheet numbers to start at different numbers, then you'll just have to manage it from there. Once you've got the sheet collections created, they will appear in the all of your plot settings, your PDF output, etc. So while we're talking about PDF, we're just going to go up to the export PDF. And again, down at the bottom here, here's that export in background option here. And you can see there, you just take it as you require. And again, if I do go to the export range here, in the display filter here, you can see there is the sheet collections in there. So it's like creating sheet sets from the start. So you don't have to kind of do it kind of as an afterthought. So you can have them kind of all set up there. And there we go. You can just plot the sheet collections or just one or the other. And again, on the insert tab here, when you go to things like import CAD, you've now got that option on there for the step file on there. So again, little additions, but nonetheless will be quite handy, I'm sure. So the next thing, again, just going to go into this data set here. We'll just have a look at this piece of fabrication ductwork. And again, on here, we can see we've got our material gauge shown on there. So that's the addition on there. And just right here, we've got a data switch. And you can see here, we've got our maximum number of circuits on there. So again, just the sort of little additions that we've made. So that's kind of sort of an overview of sort of the main core features. There are sort of one or two others, but again, some of them aren't too visual. But hopefully, it's been useful. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Paul Gribston, who's going to take us on to the next bit. He's going to look at some of the more of the core features, but also with a sort of architectural twist onto it. So over to you, Paul.
Great, thank you, Simon. I'll share my screen so you can see that. Hopefully that's all coming through okay. Yeah, so on the architecture side of things, there's been a few updates. There's a few things happening to walls. We have the auto join and lock and some wrapping, some options with mullion profiles, some updates to the carbon insight. However, the majority of updates actually are within the topo solids. These are Autodesk do group these as part of architecture, even though I think they're probably applicable to quite a few different disciplines. So we'll have a run through some of these. The first bit is the wall options here. So the auto join and lock walls. So when we create walls, this gives us the option to join them to adjacent walls. And this means that if we have openings, then as they're joined, they will pass through both walls. And then obviously the lock option will lock those so that if one wall moves, the joined wall will also move, which seems like a good idea to have both switched on. And we think really these are good for sort of complex wall types, or if you're having to model finishes separately. So that I think it's quite a good update if you need to do that as the manual version of it, to join them manually and to lock them manually is quite long-winded. So it looks like it's quite time consuming, quite a good time saver for us. And then this is quite a small one, but again, it gives us some extra details there. So we're able to control the wrapping at the ends of walls. So obviously this is when walls aren't joined, and if the wrapping is already enabled, we can effectively disable it at either end of the wall as we need to. So what I'll do is I'll jump into Revit and sort of show a few things as we're going through. So I'll swap across now. And essentially now, so looking at this plan view, we have some walls here that we might want to line with some finishes. So if I click on the wall tool, and straight away we can see up on the ribbon we have the auto join and lock options. So I'll use the auto join for the moment, and essentially we're just sketching along. Actually, let's make sure we've got the right wall type. Here we go. So we can sketch along the wall here. It's going to be better for us. Once I get the alignment set up, this will work perfectly. Right, so sketching along the wall with the auto join enabled, we can see that it connects to this wall, and any openings within these walls will actually be automatically joined through to that sort of extra wall just here. So, to do this manually, we would have to draw the wall and then select it and go to the modify and start to join, which was a bit time consuming if we've got lots of this to do. One thing to be aware of, we do now need to be aware of the host. So if I do go and place a door in, it could potentially be hosted in the wall that's joined or the main wall. So we will need to be a little bit aware of when we're picking which wall we want to join to. And what we've got in this one here is we've added some parameters that allow us to extend the door beyond the depth of the wall. And we may need this depending on how we want to deal with the finishes here. So, you know, we may need to have some instance parameters that we can control so that the door sits nicely within those two joined walls. And then for the join and lock, again, thinking about finishes, maybe it could be tiling around bathrooms or something like that. So again, if I go back to draw some walls here, we have a tile finish wall here. And this time, if I enable the auto join and lock, we'll swap this just to be a rectangle. Then when we come and draw this wall in and just snap it through to the other side, we can see it's done the join. But it's also now locked. So when we're picking on these walls, we can see we've got the lock constraints here. And it just means if I move the main wall, then our finish wall will also move as they're both locked together. And again, if I had to go around lots of bathrooms and draw these walls in and join and lock them, then that's going to be quite a time-consuming task. So being able to do that as I create them, I think is actually quite a good improvement. Right, swapping back to the presentation. So one of the other new features, we won't actually show this one, but really just to discuss it really, it's mullions, so the profile families that are used for mullions in curtain walls. They can now have multiple loops in them. So previously it was just one single loop, which meant you had one outline and your mullions were always solid objects when you cut them in section. Whereas now with multiple loops, we can create them as hollow objects by putting two loops, one inside the other. And we can also create separate shapes if we needed to. So I think that's, again, can be useful, especially when it comes to doing some of the detailed drawing. However, usual warnings apply. Please don't overdo it. Don't put too much detail in, as it can slow your models down. So look at using detail components within the profile to add that detail. The next one's a very small update to the material browser. We're able now to select multiple materials and delete or add those to libraries. So instead of doing those one at a time, we can speed that process up. And we've also got a new quick thumbnail generator. So if you do have lots and lots of materials in a project, it can be quite slow in the material browser. When it starts trying to generate all of those thumbnails for you, it can slow it down quite a bit. So enabling this new quick thumbnail generator will speed that process up. So again, it's just a nice one to help make bigger projects a little bit quicker. So this one, it's strictly speaking, it's not really in Revit, but it's kind of been processed or released alongside the Revit 25 version. So I don't know if everyone's seen, but there is on the Insight settings, there is a carbon analysis tool. So it's built into Revit on the analysis ribbon menu here. You can go and enable or send the model off for the embodied carbon analysis. This is really Autodesk are developing this. It's got some nice reporting on here. We've got some more flexible dashboards that are allowing us to do good comparisons and things. Personally, I'm always slightly disappointed because the material EPDs are sourced from the EC3 database, which is a little bit biased towards North America. So it's quite good for, I think, comparison and early stage. I'm going to plug our Navigate Zero tool here because I personally would much rather use that as it does it inside of Revit. But this is quite a good update as we're going through. And then probably the biggest, from the architectural point of view, the biggest changes have been to the topo solids. And they were introduced in 24, so it is an ongoing process. On the public roadmap, Autodesk have stated that they do want to vastly improve the site modeling tools within Revit, and this is the sort of second step for that. And they are starting to get there with this one. It has made it a bit of a good improvement over what was introduced in 24. So the first bit there, we can see that when we do convert the old topo surface into a topo solid, the building pads are now supported. So that's a welcome thing, because we had numerous comments that in upgrading to 24, the building pads disappeared and everything stopped working. But this has coincided with the new excavation tool that allows us to create a similar kind of building pad functionality inside 25 now, using things like floors or roofs or other topo solids. So we'll show through those. We have some excavation parameters that go along with that, and we can also create topo solids now based on mass objects, topo solid by face. So in the same way we've been able to do that with floors, walls, roofs for some time, we can now do that with topo solids as well. So there's some definite improvements here. There's a few more. So cut faces. So when we were, the functionality in 24 was that we were able to cut from the topo solid using other objects. Those cut faces now will act as a host to objects such as railings or, you know, trees, plants, planting, that sort of thing. We've got some editing updates, so we can see the contours whilst we're editing. So that gives you better feedback as you're sort of manipulating the surface to see what's happening to the actual contouring. And there's a smooth shading option, which is, again, a kind of welcome sort of addition there, because they always look a bit triangulated when you see them in there. And finally, and this one is one of my favorite ones actually, is the shape editing snaps that are allowing us to snap to other objects as we're adding points and split lines into that. Actually, there's one more, isn't there, which is the shaft, which sort of the default sort of behavior if you have a shaft that cuts through an object is if it touches it in any way, it cuts right through the object. So specifically for topo solids now, it will only cut as far as the shaft sits into the topo solid. So again, it acts more like an excavation actually. So again, I would probably be doing this with the new excavation tool, but we'll see some of these ones working. So let me swap back to Revit, and we've got our 3D surface model just here. So this is one that's been upgraded from 2023. It has some building pads in here. So if I select one of those, we can see we've still got the pad category, which are still editable actually, and we can adjust their heights whilst they're in here. But the standard process, so if I select the surface now and generate the topo solid from that surface, we'll just choose this grassland one, then the building pads kind of remain, and they are actually cut from the solid as well. It's a little bit difficult to see, obviously, because we've got both the surface and the solid there at the moment. So I should be able to select just that surface. And if I just do a temporary hide on this so we can see it, then we can see that the topo solid is now cut in the same way as the surface would have been. However, the slight downside is we have to keep the surface, because unfortunately the building pads are hosted by the surface. And if we delete the surface, the building pads will get deleted. So it may be that we need to change its phase, set it to existing, and make it so that we can't see the surface. Was probably a good way of doing that. But if I do delete it, we'll see that that actually comes back and we get the full solid there. So what we can do is use floors to do a similar functionality. So I've actually got some created in this model here. So I'll just unhide those. And picking on the topo solid now, we have this extra excavate tool. So when I select this, I can now come and choose the floors that are in the model just here. And we can see now that they start to act like the building pad. So it's just cutting through. So in 24, we didn't have excavate. We'd have needed to use the cut tool, but that would not have actually projected that up through the top of the solid. It would have literally just cut the volume out. So the excavate is now kind of replicating the building pad tool. Okay, so I think it's really good. Obviously, if you move the level of the floors up and down, or so I'm doing this with floors, we could do it with other topo solids. We could do it with roofs as well if we needed to. But we can sort of manipulate those. And it works also if we have shape edited the floors or the topo solids or even the roofs. So I've got this one just here, and I've set it to be a little bit of a ramp, which if I now excavate that, we can see that that works. And that's also sort of sloping up the contours there as well. So we've still got that same kind of excavation, but it gives us a bit more flexibility to create things like paths and ramps and stuff in there. Whilst we're talking about these ones, we do have the new excavation parameters in here. So picking the topo solid, I can see I've got total excavation volume from these 3 floors, and then we can view them individually to see how much material they're actually taking out of that topo solid. And then these are in addition to the usual cut and fill parameters, which obviously we need to have an existing topo solid to get the cut and fill parameters in here. So I think that those are pretty good improvements. Some of the other bits that we're going to have a quick look at. So I'll cut through, I've got another model opened up to show how this one works. So this is a slightly bigger solid in here, and looking in, we can see it's quite triangulated. Doesn't look very smooth at all. So let's get this in the right place. So on the massing and site tab now, under the model site, we can have the smooth shading option enabled. There are some limitations, such as some of the decals don't work, and there's a few things like overriding materials with paint. So I'm not quite sure how it's working in the background, but it does actually smooth out the shading, and it doesn't really slow down viewport performance. And it just gives us a much sort of nicer view of our topo solids and our contours in there. So that's kind of one nice one that's good to have switched on. The host faces that we've got in here, so we've got this topo solid cut by a mass object, so I can enable that so we can see the object that's actually cutting the slice down. And now with these railings, if I select them, I can just pick a new host and pick on my topo solid, and it will follow that cut face now. So we can do that quite easily, and equally if we come and add a site component, it will also pick up on the cut face as we add those in. So that's kind of welcome change for us. When it comes to the editing, so firstly, if I come along here and we start to add in sort of points and split lines and things, it can be a little bit difficult to see, but we can see the contours are still visible. So as those points are added in, the contours will change, and we can kind of see the effect pretty quickly that those points are having. But probably one of my favorite ones here is actually this new snap, where we've got the snap to object. So when we're adding points or split lines in here, we've got snap to objects effectively to the XYZ value. And this does actually work with an offset. So I could put a little -50 offset in here, say, and then come and add some split lines around the object that we've got drawn in here. And it will run through and adjust those points. And it's kind of a nice way of being able to shape your solid around other objects so that we can get that split lines and you know, get it drawn around that object. And it's making the regrading, and you know, if we're trying to put in roads or paths and things and trying to match the solid into that, it is making it a much easier way of working. Obviously then we can use the excavation tool to actually cut that overlapping bit out with that object still, and then you know, we'll get a much better section as we cut through those two sort of topo solids in there. So that's a quick run through of the architectural updates there. So at this point, I think I'm going to hand over to Lawrence.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. I'll just start to share my screen.
Okay, I'll disable mine.
Hopefully that's coming through. I can see it is. So yeah, we're going to take a look at some of the new structural features. In particular, as in lots of previous releases, we have some really significant updates to rebar splicing. We're also going to look at the method now of freezing rebar, which is disabling the reinforcement constraints. We'll look at some additional detailing tools for Rebar. Then we'll go into the continued improvement over analytical modeling. And finally, I'm going to finish up with the Autodesk structural roadmap so you can see the direction of travel in the future. Let's begin with the rebar splicing. Okay, so this has been missing for quite a while now inside Revit. And what I really like with this implementation is that the rebar splicing is parametric. So that means if we change the diameter of the reinforcement bar or we change the length of the reinforcement bar, that splice or lap will update. So looking into the settings here, you can see on the context tab, we can either just pick lines, we can either do it by stock length, which is the option that's currently displayed. So we have a maximum bar length and a minimum bar length. And then we have something called the runout, which determines whether the lapping starts at the start of the rebar sets or at the end of the rebar sets. We can obviously toggle that as well, which I'll show you in the software itself. Looking into the type properties, what's really nice here is we have a new system family type called a rebar splice. So we can obviously configure various different types of splice or lap. And you can see at the minute, I've got a 60 times diameter lap splice set up. The bars are going to shift or move in their plane. And you can see then that we have a staggered length multiplier and also a lap length multiplier of 60. So that's a really nice change there. We also, coupled with this, have new rebar properties. So we can actually use filters now and display any bars that are under or over stock length. So in this example here, you can see that I'm filtering on our structural rebar, and we can see here the maximum bar length is greater than 10 meters. So if that condition is met, then we can see all of the rebars obviously in red. And as you know, with the view filters, you can obviously switch off and on those bars as well. So you could hide all the bars that are at stock length or below stock length, and then just leave the bars that are over stock length, and then we can use our new lapping tools to go ahead and update some of those things. So what I'm going to do here is just switch backwards and forwards between the softwares here. So now we're inside Revit, and what we're going to do here is look at that splicing tool first. Now, you can see, obviously here, I've already got a filter active, so I can see that all these bars are over stock length because they're shown in red in this case. So what we can do here is we can go ahead and select a rebar set. And looking up onto the context tab, you can now see that we have splice rebar. If I select the splice rebar tool, we can see on the context tab, we now have three options: pick line, by length, or modify splices. So if I'm in the pick line, you can see that this is a manual intervention, and I can just move my cursor along here. Notice I get a temporary dimension. I can type data in there if I want to for a specific length of rebar, or I can go to by length. Now here, you can see that just hovering over the rebar set, Revit's now showing me where those splices or laps are going to be applied. Now you'll notice on the context tab at the top here, we have the run out set to start. If I press the space bar, you can now see that we can toggle that. So the space bar is a very handy way of flipping between those runouts. Looking into the properties palette over here, we can see that we've got an end-to-end splice. So that would be ideal if we were using couplers. In this case, I'm just going to have a staggered lap splice that I've already configured. Okay, and then I'll use the space bar here and I'll left click to actually go ahead and apply those laps. Looking into the model now, you can clearly see that the lap has been applied, and you can now see the bars are laterally offset so that they're not clashing, which is a really nice thing. And you can see it's gone through and done that for each of those sets. Let's use a slightly different technique there. So what I'm going to do is just now have a 60 lap splice without the stagger. And again, I can press a space bar to adjust the runouts. Or here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick the lines. And obviously there we can pick the lines however we want to actually splice that. So let's say I wanted a splice over here and I wanted that to be 2 meters in there. I can just type that in and you can see that that lap has now been created with the staggered offsets there with exactly 2 meters. Now, like I've said, these are parametric. So if I go back and I select these 2 rebars that we've obviously already spliced here, currently these are H12s, which are 12 diameter bars. If If I come through and increase these to H25s, we'll notice that the lap has got longer, of course. So you can see that they're adaptive and have good parametrics in there controlling those laps. Another thing we can do, if I just switch into a plan view here, you can see that I've got this reference plane drawn at a bit of an angle. And what I can do is I can go back and actually adjust any of these laps that I've already made. So I can go into here and I can modify the rebar splices. So I can just pick a splice position and I can just manually move that, or type in dimensions or use move and so on to adjust that. Or another option we've got is I can pick these rebars here, go back into my splice rebar option here, and you can see here where we've got pick lines, I can actually pick a reference plane or a beam or any other structural components actually to produce that lap. You can now see we've effectively ended up with variable rebar actually here, because obviously now we've got that lap at that angle. Okay, so let's just switch back into the presentation and we'll go through to the next part. So here we're going to look at another really useful tool called Rebar Constraints. Now, looking into this, you've probably all had situations, I'm sure, in the past where you have changed some formwork within the model, or perhaps you've changed some reinforcement conditions here, and then you get unexpected updates for the other rebar. So we have parametric rebar, and we've had parametric rebar since it was implemented in Revit. Now, generally, that's a good thing, but again, it can work against you in certain situations. So we now have the ability to disable all rebar constraints within our selected shape, or we can disable the current constraint that we happen to have selected. Now, we also have a special property that we can actually view as well. So if we have disabled rebar constraints, obviously they will not update. So we can, again, create a filter rule, and we can say here, show me all of the rebars that are currently disabled in red. So we have a good visual indication of what is going to update parametrically and what will need a manual update. So again, in here, we'll go through and take a look at that in the software itself. So to do this, I'm just going to switch into our 3D view over here. Okay, and just looking in here, you can see that I have this 3D pad foundation over here. So I have some starter bars coming up. Now, the starter bars are obviously going to lap into the column, and you can currently see I have these links that are going to contain those starter bars. Now, these ones aren't actually on cover, because they're obviously inboard of that column. So what I might want to do here is disable those rebar constraints. So I can select those links, and you'll notice we have our normal edit constraints tool, as we normally do. If I select this now, you can clearly see here that we can disable all constraints on this, or I can disable the current constraint that I might have actually picked. So if I pick this one over here, you can see I can just disable that current face. Now, to show you that in a little bit more context, what we'll do is we'll just open up a sectional view. You can see I've got two beams here, and you can see I've got this second link lapping in with the main links over there. This already has its rebar constraints disabled. So if I select the formwork here, or the beam, and I now increase the size of that, we can see that link is quite happily positioned there, and it will stay there and not react to the parametric change. Of course, this one has the rebar constraints enabled. So now, if I go and change the section size here, you can then see that the link will follow that. So again, you've now got that choice, whether you have these update or not. Okay. So let's now look at some detailing for reinforcement as well. So we have a nice new update here for schematic bending details. So bending details were launched in a previous release, and in this release we're extending that a little bit further on with these schematic bending details. What these basically do is allow us to tag the bar in the normal way. It will obviously bring out the normal rebar tag, so here I'm just showing bar marks, but then we can actually tack on, if you like, these bending details that we have. Now, because we want these to actually be able to fit within the tag itself, this is why they're schematic, so they're not necessarily to scale. And you'll notice in the type properties dialog, we can set the width and height of these schematic details, as well as all of the other configurations for dimensions and so on. Another really good improvement here, and I think this was inevitable, is when we look at these bending details, we're going to have clashes with the geometry. So obviously, if we've got dimensions here, or we've just got plain numeric values calling off the various different leg lengths of the rebar, these dimensions would have invariably clashed and not be readable. So to make them more legible, we can now control the annotations on all the bending details, including the schematic ones we've just discussed earlier on. In the same sort of vein here for producing drawings, we've now got presentation for multiple rebar sets. So again, this is quite significant. So what this enables us to do now is be able to actually control the presentation on multiple selection sets. So for example, I can just go and pick several rebars concurrently, hit finish, and then I'll have my presentation ready to start detailing. And I think Simon mentioned this on his presentation to start us off, that we've now got aligned text and tags within 2025. Now, this is very significant for rebar detailing because clearly here you can see that I have some multi-rebar annotations that I've already placed out in plan. And of course, I want these to all be aligned. And that's a great use case for this aligned text and tags tool that we've now got. Okay, so let's now take a look at these in the software themselves. So I'll just switch back into Revit here. And we'll just close down the rebar constraints view over there. And what we'll do is we'll start to look at some schematic bending details. So in here, you can see that I have a cross-section through the model at the minute. I've already got a couple of bending details added in. And I'm just going to now add a new one in to this. So number of ways to actually launch the tool. I can pick the rebar first, and I can go up on the context tab and I can select bending detail. Or, of course, I can go back and select the tool first and then the rebar constraint, or sorry, the rebar itself. So in here, you can see now we actually have a real bending detail, so not a schematic one. But looking up onto the context tab, you can see currently we have realistic. But here, if I switch to schematic, which is our new tool, you'll then see we get a more traditional type of call off. So I've got a tag here. So I'm currently calling up the number of bars and the diameter. And now you can see I have that schematic bending detail on my cursor. Of course, I can just place that down where I want, okay, and that schematic bending detail is created. Now, moving on a little bit further, I'm also going to do a real bending detail now on the link over here. So I've selected the link, and I'll come up and choose the bending detail tool again. This time, what we want to do is make sure we have a realistic detail. So if I now place this one out down here, this is what we would have seen in previous releases. You can see we've got a lot of congestion around the annotations here. And previously, we couldn't really do much about this. So what I can now do is just hover over this 160 dimension, press the tab key to cycle between the tools there, and I can just move this one out of the way. And I can, of course, do that for all of those annotations, not just in the real bending details, but also in those schematic bending details that we talked about earlier on. So, you know, that's a huge improvement for drawing legibility. Okay, so we'll also look at rebar presentation here. So I'm just going to close this view down and we'll open up our rebar presentation view. So in here, you can see that we have quite a few different rebar sets within this slab. Now, my first task here will be to select all of the rebars in here. So we'll select all the rebars in the host here. What we're going to do is go into the select rebars in rebar set over here. I'll select none, and I can now come through and actually start to select the various rebars. So I'm going to select all of these. Okay, so we'll do it like this. Okay, and I'm going to continue to go over here as well. So we'll go ahead and select some of these other rebars over here, like so. Okay, and this is really quite useful. So you can see I've got all of those set, and I can just go ahead and pick finish. And now you can see in one fell swoop, we've now been able to present all of those rebars, which is very, very useful. Now, while we're here, we'll also start to tag these up. So I'll go to the Annotate tab, and here we're going to use our multi-rebar annotations. Okay, so we have a nice new feature here, which will allow us to not have to pick positions. So let's now start to detail some of these. So we'll go through and pick these out as we need in here. And we'll then go and pick the ones over here as well. Okay, so we'll just get those picked out like so. And doing this, you know, obviously that's really fast and efficient, but I might not necessarily get all of these in alignment. So I'm going to select all of the MRAs. I'm going to pick just the tags over here. And now, as Simon already has shown you, we've now got multi-align. So here, I'm going to now align these perhaps to the bottom over here. And now I've got that perfect alignment with all of those MRAs. So massive improvement there. Okay, so let's now finish up with the analytical modeling over here. So with this, we're going to now look at some of these new workflows. So going back to 2023, we introduced standalone analytical models. So the analytical model is no longer automatically generated as we create our physical structure. And this allows for engineers to get involved in Revit in an earlier stage and start to design the model before we go ahead and start thinking about the physical elements. Now, to expedite this workflow, we can now constrain the analytical elements to grids. So if I start to move and change the grid, the analytical model will flex and update. We've also got some tighter integration with Robot now. Now, something you really need to be aware of, if you are currently using Robot Structural Analysis Professional, you must install the integration separately. This was always installed automatically when we installed Revit and Robot, but you've now got to do that as a manual intervention. Another new feature we have here is the ability to control the local coordinate system for each panel. So on the left-hand side here, you can see that we have a panel shown inside Revit, and we can obviously now flip the x-axis and the z-axis. So the downstream result on that is now shown in Robot, so we have the panel in the correct orientation. That becomes more significant when you start to put loads on, because obviously the loads will be generally aligned and normal to the local coordinate systems. So it's great to have consistency between the two tools. Okay, so let's now again flip across into Revit, and we'll start to have a look at some of those analytical modeling changes. So we'll just close down our presentation view over there, and we'll just switch into the analytical model in here. I'm going to begin by showing us some of the new tools we've got for the panels. So I'll select a panel over here, and looking up onto the context ribbon up here in the context tab, you can see I can now align the x-axis and flip the z-axis. So notice here, as I select this, I can see that local coordinate system now flipping and changing. So that's a really good update there. Let's also now open up a plan view in here. So you can now see I have the analytical modeling plan. And what I'm going to do is just tile these views so you can see these reacting and updating accordingly. So we'll just tile both of these so we can see the plan and the 3D model. Now, let's say that I wanted to now move grid 1. So if I just drag this over here, for example, instantly you can see the analytical model flex on the other side over here. So that's working by ensuring that these analytical nodes have a new control here that's set called Move with Grids. Okay, so we can control that simply by checking or unchecking that checkbox, Move with Grids. Now, what's particularly useful with this new type of workflow here is if I go to the Analyze tab and I now want to construct some new members in here, if I click on Member, obviously here I've got Start and Endpoint Definition. We've got a new interface tool up here for 3D snapping, so I'm going to enable that. And let's say that I just want to produce a couple of bars across here, so we'll do that. Okay. And now, if I select this node over here, we can see that we have a normalized curve parameter. So I can set segment lengths in here, or if I want these at thirds, I can type in my normalized parameter over there. So in this case, this will be 0.66 over there. This one will be 0.333 in there. And straight away now, you can see we've got that updated method. Now, if I do a very similar thing over here, so this will be 0.66, and this one in here will be 0.33. Right, so you can now see we have that arrangement. So if I now select grid A and I decide to move grid A, okay, over here, you can see now in this case, these nodes weren't actually controlled via that model. But of course, I can then select all of the nodes or the relevant nodes that I want to actually have updating in here. And we can then ensure that those move with grids, and then those bars would flex because obviously they're not set out to a dimension, but that parameter, which is very useful. Okay, so let's switch now back into the presentation, and we're going to finish up now with a roadmap of where Autodesk are going in the future with our structural features. So we've just talked about structural analysis, and if we look into the future as to how we're growing with this, we're going to have first automatic load combinations that are driven from structural codes. So you can see a screenshot in the bottom left there. So the formulas that we need for those code combinations are going to be automated and driven by local Euro codes or country codes or worldwide codes that we might want to use. The method of building out standalone analytical models is going to grow and get more features, so we can have a better, more robust modeling tools to actually develop that analytical model. What we're also doing here is looking to have integration with analysis directly inside Revit, so we don't have to export to Robot. We can do a lot of our workflows directly within the Revit platform. Looking into concrete and rebar workflows, we have lots of new detailing tools coming up on the roadmap. So ticking and tagging is a big one in the UK. That's quite a big one for us. But also producing drawings is also still very, very relevant. So you can see we have lots of new drawing tools in here. We've also got cranked rebar laps coming up. So in the column condition in the top left, you can see that the rebars are actually cranking rather than just doing a standard lap. And then for rebar sets, we're having these controlled by formulae. So we can have different zones within a rebar set, and we can actually drive those via parameters. Looking into the steel and fabrication workflows, many of you might know that advanced steel is now in retirement mode. So that's kind of going to stagnate now, if you like. It's going to have its existing functionality frozen, so it will still be a product, but it won't have any new functionality. The end goal here is to have all of these functions and features directly within Revit. So now, if you look in the top left-hand corner, we can currently do this in Revit 2025. We can take the parts and assembly marks directly from advanced steel into our Revit model, and they'll be directly connected with the updaters. However, things like automatic cuts, ways of being able to control the fabrication elements better, and obviously methods to produce drawings and so on are going to come into Revit. So it's going to be quite an exciting future for steel fabrication. Okay, so let's now move on to some really good deals that we've got for you. So we've just created a brand new course. So we're just launching this now. So this is an update course. So you've obviously seen some of the great new features in 2025, but we're aware that a lot of customers really could be on very old versions of Revit, for example, 21, 22, 23. And of course, over those years, there's been a whole host of very useful, productive updates. So the idea here is in this one-day course, you will learn all of these significant new features within Revit and have hands-on training. We are offering 20% off for those of you that have attended this webinar. So yeah, don't miss out on that one. Also, we've mentioned at the start about our own technology. So we have Navigate portfolio of products. So we have a large portfolio of products for Revit, but not just for Revit. We have cloud-based products, Civil 3D. We also have our sustainability tool, Navigate Zero, which integrates directly within Revit. If you want to have a look at those, want to download and get a free trial or find out more about it, please scan the QR code there and take a further look. But again, if you just want to see some demonstrations or you want to discuss the technologies with principal consultants here, then feel free to reach out with us as well. Okay, now I have been monitoring the questions. We've got a significant number of questions that have come through. We've obviously had lots and lots of interaction via chat, which is brilliant as well. We are going to follow up on these after the webinar, so we will respond to all of those questions that you've sent out. If you do want to contact us, So these are the presenters that you've seen today. So Paul, who looks after architecture, myself for structure, and Simon for MEP. We've also got Deborah in Ireland, who will help you as well within the UK. Of course, we know that this is now open to Europe. So if you want to contact anyone in the Nordics, you can see the various different people and countries and places where you can get contact and extra help and ask more questions if you want to. Okay, so just remains for me to say thank you for your attendance, and yeah, it's been a pleasure presenting to you today. I look forward to seeing you in a future presentation. Thank you.